Hi YouTube, welcome to the Pagan Perspective. It's Wednesday and I'm subbing for Eric this week. Hi YouTube, welcome to the Pagan Perspective. This is Megan, aka Sabirisary, and I'll be subbing for Eric this week. So we are doing this kind of new thing for this month, which should be kind of exciting, where we get to pick different topics. We have a whole list of topics, and then we can do any of them in any order we want. And I have a couple that I really like, and the first one I thought I would touch on is actually one that Cara did as well. So you have a little bit of two different perspectives this week, and that's on pagan superheroes. So Cara did an amazing job of really covering the comic book superheroes. What I kind of took from it, which I'm not really familiar with a ton of comic books, so I figured she covered that. I want to cover the world of TV and film because that's my specialty. Before I went into psychology, I actually was majoring in the fine arts in theater acting. So I love TV and film, huge movie buff, and I love trying to check out witches in film, and sometimes it pisses me off, and sometimes I get really excited. So why don't we touch on the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to pagans on the silver screen or the little screen, or even your computer now. So I think probably what most people think of when they think of TV witches is probably Charmed. That is, I would guess, one of the most popular television shows that included witches. Now let's talk about, were they really witches, and were they superheroes, and where did the line cross, and kind of what did they do right, what did they do wrong. So they did try pretty hard to get a lot of Wiccan elements into the show. They did have superpowers, so that was the kind of superhero-esque nature of them. They were charmed, they were, each had various powers throughout the series. The powers grow and they change, as well as when they find their long-lost sister and they get a whole new actress in. So they did have certain abilities: freezing time, later going to blowing up, telekinesis, which later turns to kind of a version of telekinesis, but orbing, weird. And then premonitions that can later get turned into this emotional manipulation, where you can literally turn around a power on somebody else. So all sorts of cool stuff, and that's a very small overview of it. But the idea is that they actually were traditional hereditary witches, this being passed down in their blood, and they do follow some Wiccan elements. They try and incorporate a few of them. They talk about things like Wiccanings. They talk about different holidays. They talk about having a book of shadows. They talk about a lot of different elements that you'll see in Wicca. They don't really touch on some of what I would consider more basics, like the threefold law, or any harm none and do as thou wilt. They do have sort of an overarching law, which is that you can't use magic for personal gain. That really is a plot device in this case. It makes it so that they can't just go out, become millionaires, and rule the world. So it works in the plot's favor, or the scriptwriter's favor, more so than it really works for the story or in traditional Wicca. One of the biggest problems I had with Charmed, though, is that they continuously, throughout the show, reference God and not goddess. They also reference Christmas. If they are truly a Wiccan family and it's being passed down, and that wouldn't be something that they would be celebrating. Or if they were, they would be acknowledging that they're celebrating something that isn't what they're believing in. So they really took it as, this is who I am, this isn't my religion. And that's the big difference that I have seen across the board. Very few TV shows, film, even comic books show pagans, or in this case, oftentimes just called witches, as it being part of who they are, but not their religion. And that is the biggest letdown, I would say. When I'm looking for a new show, I want to see that this witch, okay, maybe they have superpowers, I get it. You need to have some exciting television show. But make it be their religion, because that's the essence of what being pagan is. It's a religion. We're not doing this to gain the ability to freeze time. I mean, not that that wouldn't be cool, saying, but that's not what we do this for. This is our religion. This is our calling. This is our belief system. And most television and film doesn't have it as a religion, except, well, I'm sure there are some examples, but the biggest one that I can think of that is probably one of the biggest cult classics in the pagan community and did the absolute best job I think I've ever seen of showing the pagan religion while still keeping some Hollywood elements. And that is Practical Magic. Hands down, one of my favorite movies. Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman rocking it. You know, put the lime in the coconut. Still want to have midnight margaritas. Love that movie. There are so many elements of that movie that really touch on what it is to be pagan. I love when she is in the greenhouse and she's talking to the sheriffy marshal guy. And, you know, he's talking about placentas and I hear you're a devil worshiper. And she's like, no, there's no devil in the craft. How beautiful was that statement? Sandra Bullock, I love you. Because you can't talk about the whole religion in a movie. It's not going to be that interesting. I mean, unless you're pagan. But the majority of people aren't pagan and they need to sell a movie. So they can't just go into every little detail about a religion. But what they can do is dispel certain myths. And I loved that she did that. And she did it so eloquently. She didn't have to get, you know, righteous about it or anything. She just nonchalantly, no, there's no devil in the craft. Done. Beautiful, Sandra Bullock, love you. Also, what I love so much is that they really show that you need to have the discipline, that you cannot just dabble, as they say, and expect everything to work. What a phenomenal piece of advice. I love it. You know, obviously there are some slightly out there, well, maybe more than slightly, bringing people back from the dead, but there are some more supernatural elements to those. But frankly, if I'm looking for a pagan superhero, I think Jillian is pretty darn cool. Yeah. So the next one that I think we should touch on, if we're kind of going down the road of, well, how many Wiccan elements can we get into TV and film that are actual? The other place that we can look to is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Willow Rosenberg was pretty darn cool. She studied really hard, so part of that was about learning from the beginning and having to practice. And her and Tara become this, you know, lesbian witch duo, which rocks, and they're pretty amazing. Do they kind of go off the deep end as far as magic goes? Yeah. And they don't do such a great service to pagans and teenage witches, because at one point Willow is in college and she's in this Wiccan group. Now, the Wiccan group was, albeit a little bit fluffy bunny style, but she basically said, well, that's not real magic. And the problem was the Wiccan group was trying to make it more about religion. Well, in their case, a little activism. But the idea was that it wasn't about casting spells with, you know, supernatural powers and things. It was about casting spells for energy and for intent, which is what it's really about. And she was commenting that they weren't real witches. So that sort of did us a disservice in some ways, but at the same time, it was really good to see that, you know, you can't just magically, you know, have this superpower and make everything happen that you want to have happen. You have to have spells, you have to have ritual tools. You know, you have to have certain ingredients. I mean, there are some whole episodes where they are just trying to find a particular ingredient for this powerful spell. So she uses a lot of altar tools and different types of ingredients and things like that to help make her spells work. So that kind of touches on what you're talking about. Are there any pagan superheroes who use tools and an altar? I think one of my favorite shows of all time, though it's much more Harry Potter style than it is witch style, but it crosses the boundary, would be The Worst Witch. I'm probably aging myself here. So for those of you who have never seen The Worst Witch, I highly recommend looking it up, maybe on YouTube or some other place where you can get old TV shows. The Worst Witch is probably one of my all-time favorite TV series. It was cute, it was great. The idea where you have this little witchling and she goes to this school of witchcraft and she doesn't fit in very well and she's the worst witch. And she can't get broom riding and she has trouble turning people into toads and all sorts of things. But it's very adorable, it's very cute, and at times there are moments where they bring in true parts of the craft, which are really exciting. So you need to look for those little hidden gems of moments. But again, it's very Harry Potter style with a witchy twist. The next one that I think that we should probably touch on is a more recent one. So some of our teen viewers or even preteen viewers might know this one, The Secret Circle. So The Secret Circle is based on this idea that it's a hereditary group of witches all living in one town. There was a horrific accident type thing that happened and they kind of buried the knowledge of being witches. So their children didn't know and they kind of came about it in this different way. They really have interesting ideas on what it means to be a coven and the binding of their powers, and all of this really doesn't follow any traditional path. However, what's really nice about it is that they do bring in altar tools and different ingredients, different things to make magic work. They actually use crystals quite a bit in the show. So it brings in a lot of different pagan elements, though it is pretty out there as far as it being realistic, and it doesn't touch on the religious aspect of it at all, which again is something I usually look for when I'm giving a high rating to a TV show or a film. One of the films I think that probably most people know about, though again I might be aging myself so you might not have heard about it, is The Craft. Okay, so The Craft. This was what sort of sparked the 90s, early 2000s witchcraft phase. It also came out around the same time that Silver Ravenwolf wrote To Ride a Silver Broomstick. So it really kind of prompted the whole pagan movement among young adults. And The Craft was an interesting film. They actually brought on a high priestess to consult. The problem is they didn't listen to her very much. The producer and the director actually made a conscious choice not to use a true pagan deity in the movie. They created a whole new deity. And they chose not to use a dualistic system. We have the god and the goddess. That is essentially pagan. Well, in The Craft, they have one. Now, they do sort of go into this idea that their one thinking of spirit is bigger than the Christian God and the Christian devil. In fact, Nancy, one of the characters, explains their deity, who they call Mano, again, a male deity. Was not happy about that. But they describe Mano as being the football field on which God and the devil play. So they're saying that Mano is this bigger entity and is more all-encompassing. So in some ways, I could get around the idea that this was spirit, so it was the joining of the god and the goddess, but they're identifying it again in a patriarchal sense, in this male deity form, and they're forgetting the goddess, which is one of the essential truths of paganism. So it bothered me. I did enjoy some of the things that they had to say. They actually have a Wiccan ritual, and they include some elements of Wiccan ritual in there, which is thrusting yourself upon the blade if you're not going in with a pure heart into the circle. you know, there are certain things that they did include, and they used an athame, they used candles, they called the quarters. It's one of the only movies I think I've ever seen where the quarters are even mentioned. So there were some really great elements of it. So that's the first half of the movie. The second half of the movie goes all Hollywood. And that's where you're kind of like, oh man. There's this great moment. They called the quarters. They had this awesome ritual. All these butterflies come down around them and you can really feel it. You're like, man, that's awesome. Like that could really happen. I know I've had that happen. And I think that something like that where nature is showing you that it appreciates what you're doing and the goddess is coming to you, awesome. Then they start getting powers and start changing their hair color and doing love potions and flying and crazy things. And then they start talking about invoking the deity, which is a little bit weird. It's going to make this video way too long if I talk about all the problems that they went into with invoking. Needless to say, if you're watching the film and you haven't been into paganism at all and you're just learning, don't look at this film to learn anything about invoking the god or the goddess. Bad information. So the other place though that I think you should look at is some of the witches that are moved around in some of the supernatural things. So you're looking at Bonnie from the Vampire Diaries, looking at Lena from Beautiful Creatures. You'll also be looking at even something like the movie Willow, Finn Rizal. So there are many different options when you start looking at film. Really try and take a look at where is the religion coming from? Is there religion in it? And what elements are they using that are right and wrong? And know that if you don't know that much, if you're looking to these TV and film for some guidance, don't. Okay? Because the problem with TV and film is that they're trying to sell the movie or trying to sell the TV show. That is their number one goal, which means they are going to need to make it sensationalistic. And powers, superpowers, super pagans, they are going to sell. They are going to make money. They are going to bring in the viewership because everyone, well, maybe not everyone, but I know I would love superpowers. It'd be pretty awesome. So I think it's important to remember that they are going to try everything they can to sensationalize being a witch, and they are going to forget the essential truth, okay? The essential truth of what it is to be pagan, and that it's a religion. And they don't bring that in very often, if ever. So keep that in mind. Take everything with a grain of salt. Enjoy what you can. If it frustrates you, I hear you. I get frustrated too. But I think that there's definitely some joy to be found in some movies. I know every once in a while I have to rewatch Practical Magic just because it's so beautiful and there's so many great moments in it, and I can't stop dancing to put the lime in the coconut. And I know when I have my little witchlets, I will definitely have I'll have a virgin version. Oh, that's hard to say. Virgin version of Midnight Margaritas for my kids, because that's just so wonderful, and it's such a great little, I don't know, little thing to bring out, and little family tradition. I really like it a lot. So that's all for today. I will see you guys probably next week. So talk to you later, and blessed be.